Amazing. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar by Valet Wireless. Today, we are going to show you how to build a strong cellular policy. My name is Alexa Campen, and I'm the marketing specialist here at Valet Wireless. Now, for some housekeeping rules, we kindly ask that you remain muted and that all questions be asked in the chat. My colleague Dana will be moderating this chat throughout the webinar, and responses to unanswered questions will be sent out afterwards. Now, for our webinar today, we want you to walk away with an understanding of how to build the core components of a strong cellular policy. We want you to be able to define clear ownership and accountability across departments. That means aligning IT, finance, HR, and operations all under one approach. Additionally, we want you to avoid common policy gaps that lead to overspending and confusion, and also end with structuring your policy so that it's adopted and followed across the organization. Now, leading today's presentation is the president of Valet Wireless, Gerry Skipwith. He will start by diving into why building a strong cellular policy matters.
Thank you, Alexa. Actually, a very smooth delivery. Well done. Thank you. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. And for those that are familiar with his work and his famous book that launched him, Start With Why, it's a wonderful approach. And I think is a great place for us to start when we talk about a cellular policy, or in fact, any policy for that matter. And why would you want one? Well, the policy is a foundation for a business. It's about governance and risk management. It gives you the rules that allow the business to operate and make sure it mitigates and manages all the possible risks. And that covers, it could be brand risk, information risk, financial risk. All those different dimensions is why you want to have a good policy. Now, if we narrow the lens of policy and really just speak about cellular, why would you want a good cellular policy? Well, the first reason, and this is often why people do come back and discuss a policy, is it gives you a predictable and consistent spend. If you've got good rules in place, people are following them, and the program is running the way it's supposed to, you've got a nice steady spend over the year. And organizations that we work with that do an excellent job on this will see, if they take their most expensive month and their least cost month, the difference between the two is less than 10%. So if you want to kind of ask yourself a question that says, how are we doing? It's a crude but effective measure is take the last 12 months, your biggest bill, divide it by the lowest bill. And if there's a 10%, it's more than 10% larger, then you've got some room to improve. Companies that we'll engage with that are struggling will see differences of 50 to 60% from a top to bottom, which generally gives the finance people a lot of angst. So good policy allows you to smooth that out. The second one, we know with in today's world, with all the focus on security, the cell phones are a device on the end of your network. And by having good policy, it will ensure that you've got a good security posture, that you understand what your risks are, and where necessary, you're able to manage those with the appropriate tools through the policy that you put in place. The other one is it does make for just a better employee experience, whether it's an existing staff getting a new phone or someone joining the organization, having clarity on, what do they receive? What are they entitled to? How do they go about it? What are the rules that go with it? Having clarity around that makes it a much better experience, makes it smoother, and it makes it easier on all the people around them that they're going to be asking questions of. So it just really smooths it and cleans up that whole onboarding and upgrading process for staff. Very much related to that, good policy allows equitable treatment of staff. And we see this all the time where an organization has a certain set of standards, and as soon as one person gets the latest iPhone Pro Max, the door is open, and then there'll be a flood of those devices driving up costs and creating these issues of equity amongst people when they see that going on. The other one is a good policy means less exceptions. Many organizations that we start to engage with to help them on their policy, generally exceptions are the rule, which really means there is no policy. And good policy just means you have fewer of those exceptions, and fewer exceptions also mean less time discussing, escalating, or friction between departments, which is the next one. When you've got clarity, You don't get the kind of friction between departments around, why is someone doing something, or why is this cost like this, or why is, what's the security requirement, or why is someone not following the security policy when they're in a key role. By having that clear policy and definitions, you'll have less friction between departments. So that's, getting into the why. As we move into Simon Sinek's how, how do you go from why you need a policy to how do you create a policy? Well, we've defined the core components of a strong cellular policy. So this is the very initial building blocks, the big pieces you want to make sure you have. So the first one is really definition of who is eligible. Large organizations have different roles, different requirements in those roles. So it's really good to just narrow who is eligible for a cell phone. We suggest not going to the person as much as the persona or the role, whether it's a road warrior sales organization or perhaps a field service organization providing installation services at homes, but zoom in on the personas and then and start with that. The second is, what do you want to provide? You'll want to know, what is the plan? Is it a voice data plan with 10 gig, 25 gig? Is it a voice only? But you want to know what the plan is. And then second, you want to define what are the devices. And it doesn't just need to be one. You can have device options, but you still want to have that clarified. A really big one is the applications. Again, as you go further, what are those applications that are critical to the personas, so that you've got that well defined? And then also, and this often gets overlooked, is what are the accessories? Is there something beyond a phone, a cable, and a power charger? Is there something else that's needed? And you'll want to define that again, so you've got equity and standardization across your organization. Third component is what's allowed. What things can people do with their phone? Are there some perks? Can they roam personally? Can they incur some personal long distance? Are there any constraints that they have to make sure they abide by? So, perhaps long distance outside of North America is not allowed, but make sure you've got those things documented, and that item covered off to make sure you've got a good, strong policy. Finally, very much related to that, what's charged back? So if you do have some rules, or there's some elements that need to be addressed, or people do get some personal use in there, you want to clarify what is going to be charged back to people if they perform certain tasks or incur certain costs. What are they going to be responsible for? As you define the policy, you want to know who owns what decisions and who makes a decision on exceptions. You'll want clarity on that. And then finally, to really make it work, if you've got this policy, how do you make sure that all the definitions and the rules that you've put in place are being enforced? So those are the core components of a strong cellular policy. We'll want to make sure we cover those off as we go forward. What we've learned is that there are some key decisions that if you make them up front, or some definitions that you put in place right at the beginning, it gives you a solid foundation and the decisions get a lot easier, and it just makes sure that you cover all the bases. So there's 4 foundational elements that we recommend that you work through first. The first one is, I mentioned this idea about defining who's eligible, is define 2 to 4 personas or roles, whether it's called the road warrior salesperson or the field staff that are doing installation. Define those personas, and we also strongly recommend staying away from hierarchy, so it doesn't become a rank-based entitlement. It's more of a what's the business and dictate that this job or this persona is entitled to? What are the requirements? So document those for each of the different personas, because when you take this approach, it does give you a little bit of flexibility that not every role, every persona has to have the same features or the same opportunities to have equity in your organization, because people will understand if there's certain requirements for certain roles, it makes sense that there perhaps might be some other entitlements that go with that role. Defining the key tasks that go in that persona and the needs. And so a few examples are perhaps extensive travel. If you've got a leadership team that travels across the country or across the world, you're going to see a more extensive travel, more roaming. If it's people that deal with personal health information, there'll be a real high degree of security required. Is the phone critical to their role? Really good example are dispatch technicians, where the phone is how they receive their next ticket or their next appointment they have to go to, and perhaps as well providing information on that ticket. So it's critical. I know PSWs, if they don't have a cell phone, they actually don't work, because they have no way to know who their next visit is. And then the other is, another example is it a rugged environment? So a construction supervisor that's outside a lot, that's in the rain, in the cold, in the snow, drops the phone because there's lots going on, drives a different set of requirements as you go further through. So that's defining personas and roles. The second one is define if cell phones are a perk for your organization. And what we mean by this is, everyone has a cell phone, and would you like to um, make it a benefit, so it's something that attracts people to the organization? They've got choice on what devices they have, or they are allowed to have a single business phone, but they can use it for personal use. So there's really a decision there. Is this a perk, or is it a business tool? Those are the real hard yes and no. You can operate in the middle of that if you like. It doesn't, there could be shades of gray between that black and white that says, yes, we do want to make this a perk, but only do a certain amount. And the pro of that is it can become a feature, an attractive feature for people to work at the organization. I don't think anyone's going to stay over a cell phone, but it's just one of those things that add up that makes someone happy in their role. The con of that is it is going to be more cost if you allow people to do more stuff or more personal activity on their phone. The other bumper, on the called the very black and white definition, if it's no, and this is a work phone and it's work purely for work, or it's intended purely for work, then you really want to optimize on your visible plan. The pro of this is it's going to be less dollars, but there's going to be less appeal to people. And as mentioned, you can go in the middle. It doesn't need to be a solid black or white. It can be, yeah, we will allow people to let the phone be a perk for staff as long as it's reasonable, or we have some hard limits. So you can go in the middle. And again, this can be different for each persona. You can make this decision. It doesn't need to be one decision for across the whole organization. Very much related to the perk is defining personal use allowance. Even if it's a business only device, a little bit of personal is going to creep in, whether it's people looking at an app, or running some data, or receiving some personal phone calls, or maybe making some personal phone calls. It's going to creep in a little bit. And if you have said phones are a perk, then really define what is allowable and quantify it wherever you can, which is, if roaming is allowed, you're allowed to roam up to $200 per year. And then beyond that, the remainder is covered by an end user. So we really urge, when you put these definitions in and define what is allowed, that you put a number to that as well. It gives you a guideline for when those exceptions happen, because they will, where someone did something and they ran up a large roaming bill. You want the recourse to go back. Maybe you don't get to take the money back from them, but at least they can be aware, they know what the cost was, and they probably won't make that mistake again. So you really want to define what is allowed on the personal side, and what are the dollar amounts that go with that. Another one we run into a lot is, are wearables allowed? Um, Smartphone, or the Apple Watch is usually the big one. And where it gets a little bit complicated is, people can buy their own smartwatch, but for it to work properly with their corporate phone, the SIM card, if they have it fully connected and not just Bluetooth to their phone, if they want it fully connected, the SIM card has to be on the same plan. They can't have two SIM cards on different plans. Actually, I don't know what the technical reason is for that, but that's something we run into a lot. So you really want to make that decision. Are wearables allowed that are integrated into the device, which is going to drive a cost to the organization? And it's the idea, just really highlighting the point of always define fair usage rules. So even if the cell phones are a perk and people have a lot of opportunity for personal use with their devices, define what fair usage is, so that you've got a guideline if someone is abusing it, whether it's advertent or inadvertent, but you've got something that you can go back and say, this is what's allowed, and you're well beyond that amount. So get that definition done right up as you're building out your policy, your foundation. And then the other one is very important. And again, it can be done by persona. It doesn't need to be the same rule across everyone in the organization, but you really want to define your security requirements. And what you're doing here is you're assessing the risks of information exposure and brand reputation. And what I mean by that is if you've got a device with information on it, if that device is lost, can something happen with that information that it gets into the wrong place? Financial data from a CFO. Is there some way that data can be accessed by someone else? If someone's doing something, perhaps inappropriate on their phone, and that comes out in some way, or is seen by someone, or has some online impact, it can influence or impact a brand reputation. So you want to look at all these risks and say, which ones are registering on the radar screen for the organization. As well, look at all the legal requirements. So is there PCI compliance on financial transactions? Is there PIPEDA that you fall under, or personal health information? But look at what are the legal requirements for security of information that you need to protect, and make sure that you look at the personas and help set some definition of what the risks are. To do that, what we recommend is gauging the control needs using risk tiers. So without getting into overly complex, really just use a low, medium, high. If it's an internal admin staff that just has email, no other corporate data, that really is a low risk scenario. So you can treat it a little bit differently. If it's a CFO or someone in finance and there's very confidential financial data, that would be fall into the high side, or personal health information that people have on their devices. That risk would fall into the high side. So without making it overly complicated, look at your personas. You define if the phones are a perk. Decide what define the personal allowance limits. Again, whether it's a perk or not. And then finally, define what your security requirements are. Work through those four. And once you're complete, go back to the top and walk through again with a view towards your culture. And just a good example of this would be the Starbucks culture, where it's very much, lots of perks for the staff. They try to do everything to make their staff happy, make it an enjoyable place to work. If they had a cell phone policy of, no personal use and very constrained on what they could do, that doesn't really fit with the culture of the organization. So you really just want to have a look and say, if we've defined these personas, we've set some limits, we've talked about security, we've worked through, basically how much personal use we're going to allow, this idea about being a perk, just make sure that fits with your culture. If you go through this, the following decisions are going to be a lot easier because you've put your parameters, your bumpers in place for both what's needed and how much it's going to cost, how much certain features are going to cost you. So once you've got that foundation done, now you want to move into building the policy. So again, we've got 4 steps. So you've got your personas defined, you've made your decisions on personal, you've set some limits on how much personal usage, and you've talked about security and assess that. Well, now you can go in and by persona, determine what the entitlements are. So here's a couple examples. If it's your leadership team and they do travel a lot, they have extensive roaming. Knowing they travel a lot and they'll be on planes and in airports or on the road, perhaps they have large form factor phones so that they can do everything on their phone and don't need to open up a laptop. Those are the kind of standards, the kind of entitlements you want to look at. Another example is a frontline customer service staff member in a work from home world. Perhaps they've got international long distance or some plans built into the plan that they have. And perhaps they have earbuds are included. Don't overlook the accessories that you'll want that go with each of the personas. And another example is that the road warrior, salesperson that's on a road a lot, living at hotels quite a bit, lots of data usage because you want them to have somewhat of a life when they're out traveling on the road. They can use their phone, they can watch a little TV, so they're going to have more data because they're trying to do the things in the evening that they normally do when they're home. They might have more personal apps because that's a form of entertainment for them when they're traveling. Those are just some examples, but really what we're trying to drive to there is that once you've got your personas defined, you want to work through and define what the entitlements are for each of those personas. The other one, and this one can be big, and again, it can be different based on the persona. It doesn't need to be a one answer across the org, is decide on the number and device ownership. Where this comes in is if people are allowed to own the number, it means what you're doing is clarifying the port ins. They're allowed to bring in their personal number, which also means they're allowed to take that personal number out. So when they leave the organization, they can take that number. And so if you've made that decision by persona that an executive joins us, that individual can bring their number in. Then you've got to define a process. If that individual leaves, how do they get that number back? Actually, the how is easy. The implications are a little less easy in that you need to figure out who pays it for the cancellation fees. If someone's joined the organization, they've got a new phone, they ported their number in, they're on a 3-year term, and they leave after 18 months, there's going to be a sizable cancellation fee there, particularly if it was a high-end device. And you want to have it sorted out in your policy that who pays for that? Is that the organization that just sees that as a cost of doing business, or do we go back to the individual and ask that they pay that cancellation fee? The other big one, and this is the one that most organizations really spend most of their time around the policy is do we have BYOD or not? And building the foundation will make this a little bit easier, this decision. But adding on another decision on it is really the question of, are you doing this for financial reasons because you want to save money, or perhaps you want to save IT time that you just don't want to deal with personal phone or deal with cell phones that people can, security is a big issue. They can manage it on their own. Or are you doing it as a perk? And we see this a lot in high-tech businesses where someone will join and they'll make it a perk that they can get whatever phone they want. They get a stipend and they can buy the very latest Apple phone. But you really want to make that decision. Are you going BYOD to save money or for financial reasons or to save IT time in support, or are you doing it as a perk? If you make that decision, the other ones flow a little bit easier. Then the next decision, if you do BYOD, is it the device only? Just a device where the company still covers the plan, or is it the full plan? So someone's coming in, it's you're going to bring your own plan, sign on with whoever you want, get whatever device you want. That's the full BYOD, or is it just you can buy your own device, but we're still going to own the plan, and that way we can manage it. We can perhaps have some influence on the number. And if you whether it's a device only or full plan, is there a stipend? And how much do you want to provide people as their stipend if they are BYOD for device or if they're a BYOD for full device and plan? And if you've done that, now if you have gone to BYOD and you are allowing people, again, whether in plan, it's a full plan or device only, and they can bring in their own device, is there a minimum OS requirement? And also, we don't have it here, but it could be, does it need to be Android or Apple iOS? Because there are some apps, if you have critical apps in the business, which would be listed up when you did your defined your personas and their requirements, you would know that this app only runs on Apple. So therefore, there's a BYOD parameter that says they need to be Apple devices, and it needs to be at 10.1 in terms of the OS release, so that we know it's fully compatible with the apps and the environmental requirements in the business. And then the other is it optional? We do see organizations in Canada that we've been working with that have been going to BYOD haven't really gone to a full it's BYOD. They're doing a little more, it's an option. And I think they find that the BYOD debate is very personal for some people. If they bring their own device, a lot of people don't want the company touching it. This is my phone or my personal device. I really don't want the company being able to see my data, whether that's true or not. But you might want to give them the option so that you address the different people inside your personas, those that are quite happy to have a corporate only device, those that are quite happy to have personal and corporate on a device. It allows you to meet both of those communities or meet the needs of both those communities. And then finally, you want to decide the controls. And so again, this will flow easy. You've already looked at your security requirements based on personas. You can make that decision, is an MDM required to protect corporate data? If you have it already, you're in a good spot. But then you want to also define, what's allowed under that MDM, what apps do we allow? and what apps do we block. It's one of the reasons you put the MDM there is to make sure you've got some control on what can get into that end user device. You also want to look at a process so that you can gate personal apps. If you are going to a BYOD model or a model that allows for a lot of personal use, people are going to have some apps that they want to add. What's the process to get those apps whitelisted so that you can safely include them in your environment? And then finally, on the controls, establish your audit trails. How do you make sure that the policies you have in place and the costs and the rules that are defined, how can you make sure all that's being followed? You want to make sure there's some good audit trails. MDM logs are a good source, as are the carrier records. It might take a little bit of digging and perhaps a little bit of help, but they do have good data to help make sure that you're following your policy. Again, like we did the last time, once you've done this, go back up to the top again and just walk through making sure that your policy now, all these decisions, what you've built out, align with business needs and culture.
I'm going to give you a quick time check here, Gerry. We have
4 minutes.
3 minutes left.
Okay, my phone says 4. Anyway, we'll go for 3. So once you've got all that done, you've done the foundation work, you've built out the definitions of your plan, you want to document it. We can actually provide, if anyone's looking, just reach out to Dana, Alexa on the chat, provide us your contact info. We can share some templates for a policy document. This is one that we have here that we did recently for a customer. Generally, folks always are looking to mirror it to their existing standards. The one thing we strongly recommend to move from a document that isn't looked at to one that is fully utilized is this notion of a quick start guide. And so what you see there is a quick start guide. We've decustomized it, but this is one that was done, and it goes right at the front of the policy. And this is what people will read. It's very conversational. It really covers off the high points. This is what you're entitled to. Here's how to set your phone up. Here's what's required on the devices, and then here's what we can see, what IT can see, and what they can't see. And this will be read. It can be easily included in an onboarding package from HR, and it's got clear rules. It can be an instruction page. It goes with the phone. It makes it really easy for people to follow the policy because we've made it less corporate-ish and very conversational and really cut down to those things that are most important. So again, going very quickly. So making this work, you've got the policy, you've done all this hard work, you've got it documented, you've gone through all the steps, you've now got one policy. You also want to establish some clear lanes so that you've got a responsibility, because the policy isn't the responsibility of any one organization or any one department for it to work. It really is a corporate initiative. So this is what we recommend. It can always be modified based on your organization, but that IT set standards. They decide the security parameters, and they administer the MDM. Finance set the budgets, set the limits, and they do the audits. HR determines who's eligible based on the personas, and also, since they're bringing people on and off, that they're responsible for letting people know when someone's coming in, so the phone can be provided at the right model, and also offboarding that someone's leaving. They're responsible for that. And ops sets requirements, what's needed out of the device, and also any exceptions. Here's some reasons why they fail. We kind of really touch on this. It's the inverse of what we spoke about. Most orgs do have a policy, but they really don't. It lives in a PDF. It's long. It's outdated. It's buried on page 72 of a 200-page document, and it just doesn't get used. And we see that all the time. The other is ownership isn't clear. Is this an IT document? Is it HR? Who really owns it or administers it? And then, as you know, when those 3 parameters are in place, or those 3 things happen, exceptions become the rule. And then generally when we get a call from someone, it's when there's big bills, there's sways in the cost, there's roaming surprises, you've got tension because there's no standard devices and one person got something better. It really spins out of control.
So thank you very much, Gerry, for delivering that presentation. And thank you everyone here for attending the webinar talking about building a strong cellular policy. If you have any questions about what we talked about here today, or how to implement this information when building your own policy in your organization, please feel free to reach out to the team. You can email us at info@valettwireless.ca or check out us on our website at valettwireless.ca. Valet is the pioneer of managed cellular. We optimize costs, we streamline device life cycles, and enhance end user experiences, freeing up your IT team to focus on what matters most. Feel free to reach out to us to learn more about simplifying your wireless world. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.